Hi, sixth grade. Today we are continuing our discussion on matter, and we've already talked about in class what matter is, and we've already talked about what matter is made up of. So this is just going to kind of reiterate what we discussed in class and maybe show it to you in a different way. So if it's confusing you what matter is made up of, we're going to kind of reverse the way that we talk about things. So I'm on page 269 in your textbook, and we can see that the blue big question that we're going to be reading and kind of looking for in today's text is exactly the same question that we had in class earlier. So the big thing that we're really going to be looking for as we're reading is, what is matter made of? What is matter? A kind of matter different from another kind of matter? Around 450 BC, a Greek philosopher named Empedocles attempted to answer these questions. He proposed that all matter was made of four elements: air, earth, fire, and water. Empedocles thought that all other matter was a combination of these elements. The idea of four elements was so convincing that people believed it for more than 2,000 years. So in class, we talked about how there's so many different types of matter, and it's all kind of made up of different things. But when we really go down to the basic element, all matter has one thing in common. And that one thing is the basic unit of matter is an atom. So we're going to talk about that more here in a second. But what was really interesting was that this Empedocles said that the four elements, air, earth, fire, and water, was what made everything up. And we looked at our periodic table of elements in class, and we figured out that we couldn't find any of those elements on the periodic table of elements. So they're not actually elements. So let's read and find out what an element actually is. In the late 1600s, experiments by early chemists began to show that matter was made up of more than four elements. Scientists know that all matter in the universe is made up of more than 100 different substances called elements. An element is a substance that cannot be broken down into any other substances by chemical or physical means. Elements are the simplest substances. Each element can be identified by its specific physical and chemical properties. You may already be familiar with some elements, such as aluminum or tin. Elements are represented by one or two chemical symbols, such as C for carbon, O for oxygen, and Ca for calcium. So when we're looking at our periodic table of elements, we first need to know what an element is. I'm going to add that to my note. Notice how I have it organized. Matter is still my big topic, but now element is going to be a subtopic underneath there. So when I'm reading, I want to know what an element is. And we're really lucky in our science textbook that they actually highlighted the word element. So that tells me right around that highlighted word somewhere is going to be the meaning or the definition for element. And it says it's a substance that cannot be broken down into any other substances. Now, this definition might be a little bit confusing for you. So how I like to think about an element is that an element can only be made up of one type of atom. So an example that they talked about was aluminum. Well, aluminum is only made up of aluminum atoms. All of those atoms look the same. So made up of And remember in class, I want to add this even though it wasn't in our reading. In class we talked about how that an element can be made up of one atom, or an element can be considered a million atoms or even more. So can be just one atom of that type, or many atoms of the same type. And we're going to do some practice in tomorrow's class on looking at substances and figuring out would it be an element or not an element. Okay, the other important thing that we always want to get down if we can are examples in our notes. So if we go back to our reading and look for examples, usually your examples are going to be after they tell you what the item actually is. So we already have our definition. They give us a few other facts in this sentence, and then we see the sentence, you may already be familiar with some elements, such as aluminum or tin. Such as, that's a good key phrase for you to know that, okay, these are probably going to be examples of what we're talking about. So examples, aluminum, or tin. And there are many other examples that we could put down here, especially when you guys are working on your concept cards. Anything that is listed on the periodic table of elements is going to be an element. So a lot of people like to put platinum or titanium or gold because those are a little bit more exciting elements. But for right now, I'm going to stick with what's in the book because I know 100% for sure that those are definitely examples since I don't have my periodic table in front of me. And that's what you want to do when you're taking your notes. Don't always put down things that you think. You can put that off to the side maybe in a bubble or something like that, but the things that are in our outline are definitely things that we're taking from the book. They're 100% fact and we have no question about them. And then we're not going to put this is important. Elements are represented by 1 or 2 letter symbols, such as C for carbon, O for oxygen, and Ca for calcium. We're actually going to do an activity in class tomorrow, so I'll have a separate note sheet for you tomorrow, where when we look at the periodic table in depth, you'll be able to kind of learn a little bit more about it, and we'll take our notes on there. Okay, so we're going to flip over to our next page. And we're going to actually talk about atoms. Now, you should, before you read, to kind of prep your brain, think about everything that we've already talked about atoms in class. We know that atoms are the smallest unit, and we know that atoms are making up those elements. So imagine tearing a piece of aluminum foil in half over and over again. Would you reach a point where you had the smallest possible piece of aluminum? The answer is yes. The particle theory of matter explains that all matter is made of atoms. An atom is the basic particle from which all elements are made. An atom takes up space, has mass, and is in constant motion. It has a positively charged center or nucleus containing smaller particles. The nucleus is surrounded by a cloud of negative charge. The elements have different properties because their atoms are different. Okay, so the important thing right here, I'm seeing atom is an important term. We know that that was even the title of the section. So that's how I know what my title is going to be in my notes. And then we said that the definition is usually after that highlighted word. Sometimes it might be before. We just have to kind of look at the situation. This time, it's after my highlighted word. So I'm going to, since I'm talking about a new kind of main topic of matter, I'm going to pop that back out with my bullet points and put atom. And then I'm going to put my definition. And instead of elements, I'm going to put matter. And then in parentheses, I'm going to put elements because we know that elements are matter. And we know that the difference between what makes, a hydrogen atom, and a gold atom, is that they kind of have different looks about them, and that's what's going to make hydrogen and gold have totally different properties. So elements have different properties because their atoms are different. Okay, now it did talk about having that center nucleus made up of positive charge and then the cloud around made up of a negative charge. We're not going to worry, we're going to put that down, but we're not going to worry about what the actual names of the particles that are making up an atom are. So atoms have a positive center which is equal, it's called the nucleus, and they have a negative cloud around the nucleus. Okay, so that's going to conclude our notes on, what is matter made up of. We still are going to come back to this and add a little bit more, but we're really talking about the basics of what atom is made up of. And in the next few days, we'll continue to work with this, and then eventually we're going to add on and see how we can put atoms and elements together to make other substances.